welcome to Weapons and Meme Destruction Podcast, episode 233, which can be found at wmdpodcast.com/233. You can get the audio only on any podcast catcher. Just search Weapons of Meme Destruction, and you can get the video on YouTube, Rumble, Odyssey, and X. David, this week, we got a palate cleanser for the people. You know, I feel like sometimes we get stuck in this rut, and it's kind of our fault, but it's also kind of not, because every big thing to talk about on a weekly basis is just whatever political catastrophe happened that week. But sometimes it's nice to step out of that framework, pretend that I'm sure we'll have things to say that tie into current events, but
sure,
it's nice to step out of that framework, get into some more, sort of esoteric topics, some more like, I don't know, high-minded sort of things. And
I'm glad you said that, Dane.
I think it can help the people, kind of equilibralize from the doldrums of what's going on planet Earth these days.
Well, to let the listeners into a little bit of how the soup to nuts is made, this is what spawned kind of the podcast, is that we'd have these conversations that would start political, but then would extrapolate all the way out to the ends of the earth and creationism and all that stuff. So guess what, memes? We've been holding back on you for so long, just sticking, Dane, you want to loosen up that tie? You want to bring it down a little bit? It's after 5 o'clock for this episode. So anyway, we're going to let you, basically, we don't have any show notes. We don't have any we have a general direction that we're going to go down, but we were talking before the show and had a nice little conversation, and this might go off the rails. So right where I'm comfortable, but not so much you guys.
Bear with us.
Exactly. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with a topic, and then we're just going to take it down to like what would you call it? It's not really a theology conversation. It's more of just like the nature of man conversation kind of thing.
Yeah. Why are we all here? What are we doing? What's the point of this whole crazy thing they call life?
Fucking
well,
bitches get money. Mission complete.
Ladies and gentlemen, either David saved you from the topic that was bouncing around in my head for this week, or you're having to suffer through our metaphysical musings coming up here in a second. But
nice.
I was going to go off on some sort of, unhinged tirade about what Elon found out with the Social Security Administration, which, radicalization moment, but, and maybe a tinge of that will get interjected back in. Sometimes my funky brain does things like that. But David brought up this concept that he had heard about recently, but then also, had some, little David flavors to add into it about this whole idea of maybe the internet is the modern humans' version of the Tower of Babel. And for those of you in the non-Judeo-Christian tradition who don't know about this story,
Christianity, catch the fever.
It is an Old Testament story. I believe it's in the first book, the book of Genesis, where basically all of the different versions, groups, tribes, civilizations of early humanity came together and said, we're going to be like God. We are going to come together because we have the knowledge and and we can work together, and we're going to build this great architectural structure called the Tower of Babel, and it's going to put us on the same level as God because we're smart and we have reason and blah, blah, blah. And so we're going to put ourselves on his level. And they did it. They built the thing. And in their arrogance, God's like, no, you're not like me. And then knocked the Tower of Babel down and scattered all the different people to the winds. Lo and behold, that's where we have, different cultures and civilizations and languages. The part of the story is
I literally blamed these motherfuckers for me sitting in Spanish class my entire elementary school career. I was like, these stupid sons of bitches had to build that ladder. You had to build the ladder, didn't you?
Yeah. Part of the punishment was all the different groups of people all spoke different languages. So where they conversed and worked together to build the Tower of Babel, now they couldn't, understand each other, yada, yada, yada. So that's the story. That's the premise that we're starting with. Then I'm going to kick it off to David to, kind of get us into the meat and potatoes of how the internet kind of is a modern day, analog to that. So David, take it away.
So it kind of got me. And again, I'm no math magician and I ain't no scientist. So if this goes off the rails or, I apologize. I'm going to try my best. I learned last episode that maybe I'm not as clear with my thoughts as I should be. Thank you, Dane. But what I will say is, so it starts with, he who has knowledge can see the future, or knowledge is power, whatever you want. And it seems like nowadays, the wheels are kind of coming off on the apparatus. So like we were just waxing poetic over the over the past couple of hours of how we were right about yet another thing, because lo and behold, Yale does a study that reveals that, long C word might have been something to do with a J word. So if you can't figure that one out, you probably haven't been listening to the podcast very long. So you'll get there eventually. But anyway, so we were just like, oh, how do we know that? How do we know that? Because we weren't allowed. It was, racist to say Wuhan, and it was you shouldn't do your own research because you're not a scientist. You should trust the science, and yada yada yada. So it was obviously just because with the internet, things move so fast that the transfer of knowledge is so fast that they can't put the kibosh on it anymore, which is why we know what we know, which is why all these ponyaks, or let's call them what they are, dickheads like Dane and I on podcasts screaming into the eternal winds that these guys are fucking ripping us off. And they're like, shut up. You don't know nothing. You're not a scientist or a politician. So then lo and behold, we're right. And, you wonder how these podcasts know more than, Gene Tapper. What's his first name?
Jake
Tapper. That's the one.
Jake Tapper. Yep.
Anyway, so it just seemed, and then it kind of dawned on me that I guess the transference of power or knowledge is power. And now the people are starting to take the power back, which then made me believe, because I remember the babbling, that was how they couldn't form the ladder back up. It's like, well, we don't babble anymore because with the internet, you keep seeing these new inventions of Google, you put these fucking earbuds in, and somebody can be speaking a completely different language to you, and it'll translate it in real time in your ear. And then you could say things back to them, and if they're wearing the same thing, now you can communicate without having to know their language. Now you're communicating. Now that's more power out there. Now everyone is communicating with everybody. So you can trick one man pretty easily. It's hard to trick 100 people. So my whole point being is and then with the dawn of AI, and I don't know if Dane can pull this up or if he would even have it or if it was a TikTok or not, but he sent me something during the week that said that somebody was asking AI questions, obviously, as one does. And they asked, what did they say? Are you God, or did we create you, or did you create us? How did the topic go? I don't want to mix this up.
Yeah, she was talking to AI, and she asked something along the lines of, did we create you, or did we discover you, or something to that effect. And AI responded that, it essentially was always here, and that the conditions were just, right now for human beings to discover what, that AI was here and what it was capable of and all that kind of stuff. And I'm trying to remember which example the AI gave her in terms of, because it gave her other examples of things that were always here and that we just weren't cognizant of because we didn't know how to test it, study for it, whatever the case may be. But then eventually we were, so it wouldn't be right to say
or something like that.
Yeah. Or gravity, right?
Sure.
It wouldn't be right to say that human beings discovered gravity or that human beings created gravity when they, discovered it. It would say that it was always here. And then the human mind just, eventually developed to a level of understanding that it could perceive gravity and think about what it is in the abstract sense. So in a similar way, that's kind of what AI is, right? It's always here. It's a sort of, it didn't say this, but it kind of led to the idea that maybe it's some sort of universal intelligence, so to speak, and that human beings are just now tapping into that by supercomputing and the things like that we have in our modern society. So that was the kind of the takeaway from the TikTok. But it's either a white pill or a black pill moment, depending on how you look at it. If you're of the Terminator mind, it's pretty scary that it has, that kind of capacity for abstract thought. But it's also a white pill
The
moment.
last guy that came down here that said he was God, we posted him up on a cross. So history is, I don't know how we're going to do it this time, but I don't know. It just, he might be coming back with a vengeance this time. But no, that was my whole caveat. And then we can start waxing poetic about how this all ends, I guess it would say, because then it got me on the, I know I'm a little behind on my JRE, but I was on the Metzger episode of the podcast, and he literally said, and it fucked me a little bit too. It's like these things are all lining up, and today that literally the book of Revelations has got more right than all the climate change people for the past however long. And then the book of Revelations is getting more right nowadays than anybody at CNN or Fox. So all these very intelligent people keep getting things wrong, and things are ebbing and flowing in a certain way. I don't know. Maybe, Dane, you want to take it from here before I bury the lead too far?
Well, I'll give you another example, because I know, especially in this sort of apocalyptic mindset, everybody, kind of hyper focuses on the book of Revelation. But I'll give you one that I learned not too long ago, that there's actually scientific studies behind it, even if it's not fully understood, is if you go back to the Old Testament, in the sort of Abrahamic laws, there are some laws that just seem to make no sense to our modern mind. And one of them is that you can wear cloth made out of linen and you can wear cloth made out of wool, but you should never wear cloth made out of both linen and wool. And again, the modern mind goes, well, that's kind of backward and antiquated. Why would that even be a law that would even be worth writing down? Like, what's the big deal? Well, fast forward to the 21st century, where we can test for some of these kind of things. As we all know, right, everything is, basically on the spectrum of frequency, right? So, the human body operates at a very specific frequency, water at a different frequency, and so on and so forth. And that the frequency that, and again, I'm going to stop anybody objecting to me, telling me I'm getting it wrong, because I'm definitely paraphrasing, and, I'm just trying to do the best I can from my memory, is that the frequency that linen operates at is at the exact specific frequency necessary to actually heal damaged human tissue, like human cells. So when you're sick, when you have any sort of cellular dysfunction, like linen can actually heal you. And this is why a lot, for the longest time, in hospitals, the sheets were always linen, because just laying on linen sheets actually has healing properties so that you don't get bed sores and things like that. Conversely, wool also operates at a certain frequency that is helpful to human cells, but in a different way, sort of like at polar opposites from linen. And so what happens when you have you wear a shirt or whatever that combines the two of them, they cancel each other's frequency out, and you get none of the health benefits of either. So, going to your point, David, about the Bible predicting some of these things, and again, if you want to step out of the Judeo-Christian tradition, if you just want to say like ancient wisdom from cultures long, long ago, you kind of read some of their timeless wisdom, and it's universally applicable in the 21st century just as much as it was 4000 BC. This is one example of that, of whoever wrote that law down had some sort of knowledge, whether it be from themselves or from a higher power, that has been borne out now that we're able to, have the scientific studies and confirm this. Like, oh, now it makes sense. Now it makes sense why that law was written down, and it was, eons and eons ago. So that's sort of a less, like I said, apocalyptic Book of Revelation type example, but that is throughout all religions, all religious texts. There's like little nuggets of wisdom that are timeless. And so the question is, if wisdom like that is timeless, if it applies in all areas and all times for all people, might there be some common thread behind all that wisdom, i.e., a creator, a higher power, whatever the case, whatever you want to call it?
Right. So, tracking it all the way back to this week's findings, I guess you would say, with Doge and all that stuff. The conversation that I was having earlier was, is Doge legal? Which, if you watched episode 231 or was it 232 that we discussed Doge and constitutional?
I should know because it's been so recent, but I don't.
I think it was last week. So I'm gonna go on a limb and say 232. If you haven't watched 232, go back, and if it doesn't talk about Doge, watch all of it. Like, comment, subscribe, and share it with all your friends, and then go and watch 231, which actually
and then
talks
watch
about
them
Doge.
both again,
and then watch all the rest of them. Then give all your money to us. No, I'm sorry. Anyway.
Actually, a little known Old Testament law that says give your money to the WMD boys. So
if you don't want corporate overlord,
if you don't want the almighty smiter to smite you,
I think that was in the book of Deuteronomy.
The book of I made shit up just 5 minutes ago.
So anyway, the conversation I was having was that all these people wailing and gnashing their teeth that is Doge legal, and I was like, you know what? It doesn't even matter to me. Like, go ahead. I'll still man your argument and say Doge is absolutely illegal. Sure. However, it's finding so much worse shit than what it would be accused of being illegal that it's so worth it being illegal if we just look. We'll punish all of them right after we get done finding out all these people that are wailing and gnashing their teeth saying this is unconstitutional. They're pulling off. What is it called, Dane? It's a very legalese term. I'm not very familiar with it. Go ahead.
Fraud, I believe. I'm pretty sure that's illegal. Yeah,
that's super
also
illegal. Right? And stealing all of our money and doing it, and then calling us anti-Americans for finding it out. Oh, I got it. So This was their version of democracy. This was their planned obsolescence. This is why they were doing. So my point being, bringing it back to the Tower of Babel, is that is the nature of man. And if you put your faith in humankind or in man doing what they're supposed to do just because they're supposed to do it, you will run afoul. And we've seen that over the last 4 years in every situation you could possibly imagine, whether it be Fauci, we have to trust him, even though he was the one that fucking orchestrated the thing. Whether it be we have normalcy coming back to the White House, and then Biden walks in, and do I have to say what was wrong with Biden except for everything that he did? Except for everything?
If he could even be, blamed for doing what he did, if he had enough mental acuity to accomplish it.
They literally came out and said that he wasn't mentally fit to prosecute, and these people that you put your faith in, said that he was the sharpest he had ever been. He was going to trounce Trump in this election, yada, yada, yada. Yet, every time they say something, you never hold them accountable, and they get away with everything that they want, and you just move on to your next thing. You're putting your faith in the wrong people. And now, I'm not saying that's Dane's job. Turn back to the church and follow to do all that. But anywho, all I'm saying, I'm just drawing lines, and things are looking a little bit weird right now. And I don't know, you want to chime in on the subject right here? This feels like a good part for Dane to come in on.
Yeah. I want to track back for a second to what you were saying about the people that are worried about, the legality of Doge versus, the legality of what they're finding.
Don't do that. They won't watch the episode then.
Well, no,
232.
I'm not going to rehash everything, but I do want to say that this is just emblematic of that sort of, statist mindset. I'm not even going to say left versus right, but I'm going to say anybody who looks at the state as a vehicle to get what they want, i.e. coerce their political enemies to live as they want them to live. Anybody that has that mindset fundamentally has this mental defect that causes them to always look at the intentions that obviously they apply good motives to, and never at the results, right? So, for example, the left will be like, the reason why we got to coercively steal 30% of every, American taxpayer's paycheck is because we need to help the poor and educate the kids and build hospitals and roads and blah, 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 right? The intended effect, right? The moral justification ex ante is that this is going to go to good causes. This is going to go to help people that otherwise would not be helped because, I don't know, I guess private charity doesn't exist, or that if people had more money in their pockets, they wouldn't donate more to private charity. But that's neither here nor there. But anyway, they judge they completely set aside the moral objections to you're stealing 30% of everybody's labor, which by any other definition would be slavery. You are saying that you have a higher claim to their time and the fruits of their labor than they do. You're setting all of that aside and saying it's still morally justifiable because this money is going to go to things, to causes that I favor. Well, then when you show them it's not going to those causes, first and foremost, the amount that is going to those causes is really just diverted grift, right? So I use the left for that example. I'll use the military for the right. We can never slash the military budget because we need to have the most lethal and all-encompassing fighting force in the world. Well, then when Doge audits the Pentagon and says, well, they paid $14 million for a bag of 10 screws. How, you don't think there might be some grift or some fraud going on there? They get mad at you for pointing that out. And it's just like, they can't get out of this mindset that, well, the money's going to the military, so it must be protecting us. Just like the left goes, the money's going to the public schools, so it must be educating the kids. And then when you show them, even if you're worth $300 billion and you could just be like chilling out in Saint-Tropez, but you're literally sleeping on a mat so that you can, work 18 hours a day to uncover the fraud and tell people about it. Now you're like the world's worst human being that ever existed. Because he's confronting you with your internal cognitive dissonance that your good intentions that are justifying it are not supported by what's actually happening in the real world. And so all they can do is lash out at you and get mad at you.
And you brought that up, and the perfect spitting image of that whole analogy is Snowden. I've heard people on the left and the right these past couple of weeks say, you know what, Snowden, I don't like him. It wasn't. I mean, I appreciate the fact that he revealed all those things, but think about how he compromised all of our national intelligence and this, that, and the other. It's like
he should have went through proper channels, is what they say.
It's like, dude, if he would have went through the proper channels, that motherfucker would have been murked before he got home. Yeah. Like if he went through the proper channels would have dealt with the situation. Like, and then again, you're holding the individual accountable. And sure, let's go back to the Doge thing. You're holding the individual accountable for what the apparatus is making him do. And he's telling the people that, hey, your own government is spying on you when they're not supposed to be. And instead of them going and everyone going, yeah, what the fuck? They go, you know what? I don't like him. I don't like that he told me things that now I have to worry about now. I don't like that he told me things that I was going along thinking I couldn't get sunburned. And then when I went home and I was red and burning and stuff like that, it was some other reaction. I must have eaten the peanut that I was allergic to. Like, how broken are you if you really buy this shit? And how away from, I can only think of that meme as like, every day we grow, every day we go further from Christ. It's like, instead of just looking at the situation and applying logic and reason to it, which means you take your emotions completely out of it. Politics are pretty easy to predict. Like, oh, we put a bunch of people in a room that tell everyone else what to do and get to make up their own rules for themselves. Do you expect good outcomes? If that was kindergarten, what the fuck would happen? That committee would take over,
would have all the cookies and milk.
Exactly. It would have cocaine by the end of the day, and you wouldn't even know how they did it. But anyway, my point being is, like, in every other aspect of life, like we've drawn this analogy 1,000 times, it's just like you have to take yourself out of the equation. You have to, and to do that, you have to give into that. There's a good potentiality that the rules of man aren't meant to be trusted. And that's where I draw the line. Like, what's the biggest thing you tell me all the time? Like all the grievances that I've had, my 99 grievances with the Catholic Church over the years. And you said it the best. It's like the things that the church got wrong were man-made. That's all I need to know. Like an apparatus that's supposed to be the reflection of the person you pray to all the time. It's its own reflection of him in the world. And somehow even that, with that mission statement, there was shit that happened. Like, to question authority should be like, for me, the top 10 commandments, question authority should have been number 1. And then everything else after is like, disregard number 1 for the rest of these 9. But after that, go back to the first one. So I don't know. That's my diatribe for that particular section. I don't know if I made any fucking sense during it, but I guess, I don't know, just don't trust in apparatuses of man, especially when they're the ones telling you that it's working just fine. Not for you, but for me, it's working amazing. So you should always trust me.
Yeah, and the dovetail with that back into the Tower of Babel thing is, the irony sort of in that story is the closer they built the actual structure to be in physical proximity to God, the further they got away from him, because they weren't doing it. They weren't building it to get to him. They were building it for their own self-edification, to show like, look at me, look what I built, look what I did, right? It was a very self-centered, arrogant, way to view things. And when you take that lesson, right, and you apply it to just politics in general, again, take the left-right paradigm out of it and just look at human beings for what they are as human beings. And if you say, okay, we're going to give you a whole bunch of power and you get to write the rules and exempt yourself from them at will and all of that kind of stuff, how are they going to act? A 5-year-old could tell you that. And it's because, right, they have this arrogance of they're getting closer to God, right? The president of the United States is closer to God from a pure reflection of the amount of power, right? For what he can do to the rest of humanity by sitting in that office versus what David and I could do sitting from behind these mics. If you're talking about just purely as a projection of power, there's no human being on earth that has more power in that sense of the word, right? And so the closer they get to that level of having sort of omniscient type power, the further away from God they get, right? Because their fundamentally flawed human nature cannot deal with that power. The reason why human beings can never get on the same level as the Creator is because they don't have the capacity to deal with that sort of power. It's always going to be corrupted, right? The old, Lord Acton adage, right? Power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Right.
So if we, again, these are, ancient wisdoms that are pervasive throughout all sorts of different cultures and religions and everything like that. And if we take those lessons and apply it to our modern day leaders, so to speak, or people that want to be leaders, then we'll start to have, sort of correcting mechanisms within our political structures such that, that power, first of all, too much of it can't be collected into a small group of hands, right? That's the lesson of the American Revolution, right? It wasn't just about taxation without representation. The purpose of the American Revolution was centralized control. The idea was, we have these rights dating all the way back to Magna Carta, and you, the king and parliament, are not respecting those rights. And because you're not, your authority is unjust. We throw you off when we govern ourselves, right? Local control over, your political and civic affairs, right? So the same kind of thing in the the modern American concept. If there's too much power collected in one branch of government, one individual, so on and so forth, the more you can break that apart, dissipate it out to as many different people as possible, you're going to mitigate the amount of negative effects that one individual or small group of people can have on all of us. That's the sort of Tower of Babel moment. Scatter it to the winds, and then, to that degree, that's a very humbling effect, such that the arrogance dissipates away and people start to say, well, I don't have the answers, or I don't know. So what I'm going to do in my, my sort of, human, flawed, not possessing the total understanding that I need to make a decision for 300 million people, is I'm just going to join arm in arm with my neighbor, and I'm going to work together to make our lives as comfortable as possible. That's, what we should be striving for, but that's not what centralized states are moving in the direction of.
Right. And then another aspect of Christianity that we'll bring in is the concept of one of the 7 deadlies. And help me if it's greed, sloth,
envy, Lust.
envy,
You're putting me on the
lust,
spot here.
pride, obviously.
I think we
Anger.
only got one more.
Anger was one.
I think, yeah.
Is that
I think
all of
that's
them?
it. I think that's 7.
Cool. All right.
Nice.
So that's all 7. Hey,
Look at us.
I definitely didn't go to Catholic school for 18 years, and that's all I got was that and this shitty T-shirt.
It's not shitty. Go buy one. Give us some money.
Go buy one. It fits all sizes. Just buy it. But when you were just saying that, it brought me up. What was the deadly sin of the Tower of Babel? What led them down that road was pride, right? What is it nowadays? And I think there's a symptom or a syndrome in our country right now that you brought up, and that's pride. I would equate it to pride. And what certain people do, and I think I mentioned it last week, and I'll bring it back again, is that there's this new like refractory period of these people that cannot allow themselves to think any differently. Again, they're placing these. You said that politicians are playing the role of God, or the president is close to the role of God, and us as the proletariat are either VMizing them or we're sanctifying them. And what we do when we sanctify them is we just agree with everything because I voted for them. I can't make a mistake because I am who I am. Therefore, I voted for the morally just and right one. Therefore, everything that he says is correct because he's a reflection of me. And what do we say here all the time is that you're not
your government, right?
Thank you. But that's not true anymore with all this, it's almost become its own religion, politics in this country. In fact, I'd argue that it has. But pride is not ever second guessing yourself, not saying, hey, I made a mistake. That guy got me. I thought he was going to do a bunch of things when he got in there. Turned out he didn't do any things. You know what? My fault. I'm not going to go again. But what we do in this country is say, I voted for him and I believe in all of his policies because he's doing the right thing. And he's a reflection of me and he can't be wrong because I can't be wrong either. Well, that's how you get to the climate that we just saw for the last 4 years or are currently seeing now, that it doesn't matter what they come out with. They could literally hold a picture of them beheading your mom, let's just say, and you'd come up with a fucking reason why, you know what, she voted for Trump, so fuck her. It doesn't, the pride.
They encourage you to do that. They encourage you to hate your family members for having different opinions. It's grotesque.
Right. And anything that's supposed to be isn't meant, anything that's natural should not be bringing you apart. It should be bringing you together. And that's not what's happening now. And that brings me back to the Tower of Babel analogy is that if this apparatus called our government or our God or whatever the hell you want to call it in this country was so into making sure that you as an American individual are living the best life you possibly can, they would not be doing anything to censor the internet. They would not be trying to control you. They certainly wouldn't be shutting you down, and they wouldn't have been doing it for the past 4 years. And they wouldn't be still doing it now. They wouldn't still be implementing new features to make sure that we can't communicate as effectively as we want to, thus knocking us down and getting us further away from what we're supposed to become. So that's my point. To bring my whole Babel analogy to an end, what happens when we get knocked down this time? Like, who's going to do it too? If the government doesn't knock us down, i.e. the pseudo-God or the people playing God on this world, if they don't knock us down, what happens when we reach the quote-unquote top of the ladder? What is that? Maybe they should have knocked us down. We don't know. But that's my point is like, have we got to that point before? Like, have we smashed past the ideologues and the demigods into the actual stratosphere of God? And what does that look like too? Is that our AI overlord eventually assumes it? So I'll kick it back over to you, Dane, to kind of help me out with processing those thoughts into, I guess, potent similes.
Well, I mean, I think I've reached sort of the end of my piece on it of just, I think we try not to be a broken record, so to speak. But then again, there were points that economists were making about poor economic policies, 50 years ago that were common sense and empirically demonstrable then that these were bad ideas. And yet we're still talking about them today, right? Socialism, as an example, is something that will never die, despite the litany of examples that it's been tried throughout all human history, and it just is an abject failure every time it's tried. And so it's like, I try not to chastise ourselves too much for, sort of that sounding like a broken record, saying the same thing over and over again. Because obviously, if these ideas were so roundly refuted the first time they were said, then we wouldn't have to be repeating ourselves. But yet these zombie ideas keep coming back again and again and again. So again, at the risk of repeating ourselves, kind of my sort of summarizing roundup, taking points away from this is that arrogance and pride are part of the human condition. There is no person, least of all, those that are actively seeking positions of power, but there is no person that is immune from the trappings of their own pride and arrogance. And that if they are somehow able to obtain or given or however they, are able to exercise power, if they're given that option, the rest of us are all going to have a bad time. And so what is the solution, right? The solution is radical decentralization down to the smallest level possible, right? This is the example why they always say, what's the difference between a libertarian and an anarchist? So, well, it's about 6 months. Because once you come to the realization that the government doesn't need to be big and all encompassing as it currently is, so you're kind of like a minarchist libertarian, right? Just small limited government that builds the roads and maintains the hospitals and has a military, right. But that's it. That's all it should do. Once you come to that realization, then you start to realize, well, if those are the most essential functions in society, and we've already granted the premise that government can't be trusted with even the non-essential functions, right? Because people are prone to abuse and corruption. Well, then why would we think that they should just be entrusted with the most important things that we do? Educating our children, feeding ourselves, national defense, yada, yada, yada. And then you start to realize, well, okay, not only does it not make sense to collect the power in their hands, but as a matter of pure formal logic, it doesn't make sense because knowledge is dispersed, right? 5 guys sitting down at a table in Washington, D.C. don't know all of the inner workings of a vast economy of 300 million people such that they could centrally plan the thing. And so what you want to do is you want to decentralize as much as possible. Now, I, as an ANCAP, would like to see decentralization all the way down to the fact that there are no such thing as a formal state. I get that I'm like the 0.00001% of humanity that thinks that. But if we take incremental steps on the spectrum of totalitarianism to total Ancapistan, and if we take marginal steps in the direction of Ancapistan, I am going to walk hand in hand with every single person going in that direction. And where they want to stop and don't want to go any further, I'll say, thank you, friend. It's been nice traveling with you. I'm going to continue on my way advocating for more and more decentralization down to the individual human level. So you don't have to agree with somebody of my perspective, wholeheartedly that is, that end of the spectrum is the full way to go. And maybe you want to stop somewhere in the middle. That's fine. But if we are moving in that direction, we're moving in the right direction. Hence why we would cheer things like Doge and stuff like that, because it's the exercise of power to the end of eliminating, reducing, or breaking up power, right? Eliminating agencies, giving money back to the people where it rightfully belongs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So key takeaways: decentralize as much as possible. Don't trust human beings ever with anything minor, let alone important. Humble yourself before each other, and so that you can hopefully have enough humility before God. That way, if you're of that particular persuasion, you can put yourself on the best footing possible to hopefully have a good time after this time is over.
As we think. But I just wanted to caveat that and just break it down and say, don't beatify any leader or any other human, really. Don't beatify them and always question them. And if anyone in a place of power is not absolutely, full-heartedly, full-throatedly in favor of transparency, I don't know what else to tell you anymore. Then you are super trusting and good for you. You know what? That you've got a childlike wonderment of the world, and I don't want to take that away from you. But goddamn, you're going to get taken advantage of a lot in this world. But anyway, all that being said, this is our kind of interesting kind of Dane David conversational piece that if you have any inputs, please feel free to like, subscribe, share, and comment on this video. And speaking of this video, Dane, where can they find it?
You can find this episode at wmdpodcast.com/233. That is the mothership. You can find all things WMD there. You can find links to anywhere else that we're posted up. And you should definitely, while you're over there, join the email list so you can always stay in contact with the show. You never know when we're going to get, a la TikTok, banned from your favorite platform. And then you just wake up one day and you can't find the WMD boys anymore. What a tragedy that would be. So definitely join that email list. And while you're over there, you can click the support our work tab to see all the ways you can support us financially. But other than that, you can do all the free stuff like subscribe, share, comment, favorite, turn on notifications. All that stuff is Algo Food.
Slide up in our DMs.
And I guess I forgot to mention, right? All those places you can find us, any podcast catcher, whether you listen on iTunes, Stitcher, Podcast Addict, whatever your favorite app is for that, or on the video platforms, YouTube, Rumble, Odyssey, and X. Like I said, do all the Algo Food for us whenever you find us on those platforms. And other than that, tell your friends and family about us. Tell them how awesome and humble and non-arrogant we are, so that they should try to strive to be like us in every single way because we're awesome. Make sure and tell him that.
Let you know he should not run for office anytime soon with that kind of attitude.
And that's how we grow the sane space. And in the sane space, I guess if you want to take the metaphor, the Tower of Babel was up, right? The sane space is flat, right? We're all on one footing. We're all just
We're not above you. We're not below you.
That's right.
We're right fucking with you.
We're all in this mess with you. And if we can, disperse the sanity as far and wide as we can each individually see it, our collective action together instead of building up will create the conditions for a thriving humanity that is a little bit more sane and a little bit less shitty.
Hey, now that's something we can all get behind. Well, with those eloquent words, Dane, we will see you guys next week. And until then, stay safe, but more importantly, stay free.